This morning, before most of you woke up, US and Israeli aircraft struck Tehran's power infrastructure. The city went dark. 87 million Iranians lost electricity. For a few hours, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth sat in blackout. And somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, the President of the United States was telling the Financial Times that he wants to take Iran's oil, that he is still considering whether to seize Karg Island, that he will make a deal with Iran. He is pretty sure. Pretty sure. This is day 31 of Operation Epic Fury. And I want to stop and tell you something that I genuinely believe most people, including most people inside the United States government, have not fully understood yet. America is trapped. Not losing, not struggling, trapped. Those are different things. A nation that is losing can change course. A nation that is struggling can adapt. But a nation that is trapped, a nation that cannot go forward without catastrophe and cannot go backward without catastrophe, that nation is in a fundamentally different situation. And that is exactly where America finds itself on this 31st day of this war. Today, I want to explain exactly how that trap was built. Because it was not built in the last 31 days, it was built over decades. And understanding how it was built is the only way to understand whether there is any path out of it. So let us begin. The first thing I want you to understand about this war is something that took me years of studying conflicts to fully appreciate. Wars develop their own momentum, they develop their own logic, and very quickly they stop being something that leaders and generals control. And they start controlling the leaders and generals instead. Think about Ukraine. That war began in February 2022. And from the very first weeks, both sides knew that a negotiated settlement was possible. Both sides understood that continuing the war meant enormous suffering, enormous economic damage, enormous human cost for both nations. And yet, 4 years later, that war was still grinding, still destroying, still consuming lives and economies on both sides. Why? Because once a war begins, stopping it requires something that almost no government in human history has been willing to do. It requires one side to stand up in front of its own people and say, we accept terms that feel like humiliation. We agree to something that our soldiers did not die for. We call this a resolution, even though it feels like defeat. That is extraordinarily, almost impossibly difficult. And I say this not as a criticism of any particular government. I say it as a student of history. It is simply what wars do. They create their own momentum. They generate their own reasons to continue. And the longer they run, the more reasons accumulate. Now, here is why this war, this specific war, is even harder to stop than Ukraine was. Because at least in Ukraine, if America had wanted to stop, it could have stopped. It could have reduced its support. It could have pushed for negotiations. It had options. In this war, America does not have those options. And the reason why is the trap. The trap that was built long before the first bombs fell on February 28th. Let me walk you through a scenario. And I want you to follow this very carefully because every step matters. Imagine it is tomorrow morning. President Trump wakes up and decides he has had enough. The war has lasted 31 days. 22 American soldiers are dead. Brent crude is trading at $112 a barrel. Goldman Sachs has raised recession odds to 25%. And Pakistan, which has been passing messages between Washington and Tehran, is offering to host talks. Trump picks up the phone. He reaches out through the Pakistanis. He says, let us talk. What does Iran say back? Iran says, fine, we will stop fighting. But here are our terms. First, America pays Iran $1 trillion in reparations for the destruction of this war, for 20 years of sanctions before this war, for the assassinations, for the universities bombed, for the desalination plant on Keshem Island that left 30 villages without clean water, $1 trillion. Second, and this is the one that cannot be negotiated around, America leaves the Middle East permanently, closes its bases, withdraws its forces, removes its military presence from the entire region, not for 10 years, not until the next administration, permanently, because Iran's position is not complicated. The only way to guarantee that America never does this again is to ensure that America is not physically present in the region to do it now. Some people hear those terms and they think, well, maybe that is not so unreasonable. Maybe America should leave the Middle East anyway. Maybe 31 days of war is enough. And I understand why people think that. But that thinking misunderstands what would happen the moment America accepted those terms. The moment America withdraws from the Middle East, a chain reaction begins. Let me walk you through it step by step. Step 1. The GCC becomes Iran's sphere of influence. Right now, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, they exist as independent nations because America guarantees their security. The moment that guarantee disappears, the only military power in the region capable of guaranteeing anyone's safety is Iran. The GCC does not become Iran's ally out of ideology. It becomes Iran's client state out of survival. Step 2, the petrodollar collapses. And I want you to understand why this is the step that makes everything else irreversible. America is sitting on $39 trillion in national debt. 39 trillion. The mechanism that allows America to carry that debt without collapsing, the mechanism that has allowed America to borrow and spend at levels no other nation could sustain, is the petrodollar. The GCC sells its oil in US dollars. Every nation on Earth that needs Gulf energy must hold US dollars to buy it. That creates permanent structural global demand for the American dollar. And the GCC recycles its dollar earnings back into US Treasury bonds, funding American debt at affordable rates. The moment the GCC falls under Iranian influence, that mechanism ends. The GCC no longer needs to sell oil in dollars. It no longer needs to recycle its earnings into American markets. The entire financial architecture that has sustained American economic supremacy for 50 years, gone. The 5-step chain reaction. Why America cannot accept Iran's terms. Step 1. GCC loses American protection, falls under Iranian sphere of influence. Step 2. Petrodollar collapses, global demand for US dollar evaporates. Step 3. Japan and South Korea conclude American security guarantees are unreliable. Begin rapid remilitarization. Step 4. Europe recalculates, makes peace with Russia, NATO fractures. Step 5. US dollar loses reserve currency status. America cannot service $39 trillion in debt. Net result, accepting Iran's ceasefire terms is economically more catastrophic than continuing the war. Step 3. Japan and South Korea remilitarize. Both nations are already watching this war and asking an uncomfortable question. If America cannot win decisively against Iran, can it really protect us against China and North Korea? If America withdraws from the Middle East under Iranian pressure, the answer to that question becomes impossible to avoid. Both nations begin serious military buildups. Both nations stop spending their resources on American weapons and start spending them on their own defense. Another blow to American economic power. Step 4. Europe makes peace with Russia. Right now, Europe supports America's position in Ukraine at enormous economic cost. But if America retreats from the Middle East, Europe draws one logical conclusion. If America is withdrawing from one theater under pressure, America might withdraw from Europe too. And if that is the case, why is Europe continuing to fight America's war in Ukraine at enormous cost to itself? The Western alliance, built over 80 years, begins to fracture. Step 5. The US dollar loses its reserve currency status. Add everything together. Petrodollar gone. Japan and South Korea no longer supporting American military infrastructure. Europe fracturing from the Western alliance. Nations stop holding dollars. Nations stop buying American debt. And America, sitting on $39 trillion of debt, has no way to service it. This is the ceasefire trap. America cannot stop because the price of stopping is the collapse of the financial architecture that keeps America alive. And so the war continues. Now, if America cannot negotiate its way out, what does it do instead? It escalates. It looks for something dramatic, something that shows strength, something that breaks the stalemate. And this week, right now, as of today, March 30th, the answer Washington is arriving at is Karg Island. 3,500 U.S. Marines arrived in the Middle East on Saturday aboard the USS Tripoli. The Pentagon has been preparing, according to the Washington Post, for weeks of limited ground operations. Trump himself told the Financial Times, and I want to quote him precisely, "Maybe we take Karg Island, maybe we do not. We have a lot of options." And then he added, "It would also mean we had to be there for a while." For a while. I want to talk about what that phrase means, because I have heard it before. And the last time America used that phrase about a military deployment in the Middle East, it stayed for 20 years. Let me tell you why Karg Island is not a solution. It is the beginning of a trap within the trap. The logic of seizing Karg Island seems compelling on its surface. Karg handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. Take it and you cut off the funding that pays for Iran's war. You bring Iran to its knees economically. You look decisive. Trump looks strong. American morale surges. But here is what happens the moment those Marines land on that island. Karg Island sits close to the Iranian coast. The moment American forces are there, Iran starts hitting the island with artillery, with drones, with missiles, the same drones and missiles that have already destroyed 7 American KC-135 aerial refueling aircraft, that have killed American soldiers in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, that have hit the Prince Sultan Air Base. Iran is not out of weapons. Iran has been building and storing those weapons for 45 years. So to protect the Marines on Karg Island, America has to take control of the nearby coastline. But now American forces are on the Iranian coast, and the Iranian coast is watched over by the Zagros Mountains. And Iran starts hitting American positions from the mountains. And so America has to take the mountains too. And once you are in the Zagros Mountains, you are not conducting a limited military operation. You are in a land war inside one of the most geographically complex countries on Earth. I want to tell you a story, because this story has happened before. And it happened in a way that America has not forgotten and should not forget now. The year is 1965, March 8th to be exact. The first American combat troops, 3,500 United States Marines, wade ashore at Da Nang, Vietnam. It is a limited mission, a defined objective. 3,500 men. The Secretary of Defense said at the time that this deployment would be temporary, that the Marines would establish a security perimeter, that they would not be conducting offensive operations, that they would be home soon. 3,500 Marines, a limited mission, a defined objective. 4 years later, there were 543,000 American troops in Vietnam. Let me say that again. From 3,500 to 543,000. How does that happen? How does a nation go from 3,500 men on a temporary security mission to 500,000 troops in a war that would last another decade and claim 58,000 American lives? It happens through something called the sunk cost fallacy, and it is one of the most powerful and dangerous forces in all of human decision-making. Once you have invested enough, once you have lost enough, you cannot stop. Not because going forward makes strategic sense, but because stopping feels like all those losses were for nothing. Because the families of the men who died need to believe their sons died for something. Because the politicians who authorized the mission need to believe they made the right decision. Because leaving feels like defeat, and no government can easily choose defeat. America went through this in Vietnam, it went through it in Iraq, it went through it in Afghanistan. And the 3,500 Marines who arrived in the region last Saturday, the Marines aboard the USS Tripoli, the same number almost exactly as Da Nang in 1965, are standing at the beginning of that same path. The mission creep timeline, how it always goes, weeks. 1-4, limited operation. Defined objective, minimal footprint. Months 2-3. Objectives expand to protect initial forces. Coastline, then highlands. Months 4-8. Insurgency begins. IEDs, drone swarms, ambushes in mountainous terrain. Year 1-2. Troop numbers multiply to manage expanded theater. Year 2+. Sunk cost makes withdrawal politically impossible. Iran. 90 matter people. Zagros mountain fortress. 45 years of asymmetric warfare preparation. Iraq had 25 million people and flat desert. America spent 20 years and left with nothing. Iran is not Iraq. Iran has 90 million people, nearly 4 times the population of Iraq when America invaded in 2003. Iran has mountain ranges that make Afghanistan look navigable. Iran has a military that has spent 45 years, not months, not years, 45 years, studying American military doctrine, identifying every weakness, and building asymmetric capabilities designed specifically to counter what America does best. And Iran's parliament speaker said it plainly on Sunday. I want you to hear these words. He said, "The enemy publicly signals negotiations while secretly planning a ground invasion. Our forces are ready for any U.S. ground troops. We will never accept humiliation." That is not a bluff. Iran has never bluffed about this. And now I want to tell you something that most mainstream coverage will not tell you, because it is the kind of information that makes people people in Washington deeply uncomfortable. The American military does not want to fight this war. Not because American soldiers are not brave or capable. They are among the finest military professionals in the world. I have enormous respect for them. But because the American military has war-gamed this conflict, they have run the simulations, modeled the outcomes, tested the scenarios dozens of times, and every single time they run the war game against Iran, America loses. Let me say that again. Every single time. Why? Because the American military was designed for a specific kind of war, the Cold War kind, overwhelming air power, precision strikes, shock and awe, destroy the enemy's defenses in days, roll in with armored columns, topple the regime in weeks. That is what happened in Iraq in 2003. Air supremacy in days, Baghdad in weeks, regime gone in under a month, fast, clean, decisive. Iran looked at Iraq. Iran looked at Afghanistan. Iran spent 20 years watching how America fights. And then Iran built a military designed not to defeat America on America's terms, but to make America's way of fighting useless. Iran disperses its forces across mountain ranges instead of massing them for airstrikes to destroy. It uses cheap Iranian-made drones that cost thousands of dollars to shoot down missiles that cost millions. It has built command structures so decentralized that even if you destroyed Tehran entirely, the military would keep fighting. And it has proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, who fired at Israel just this weekend, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria that can open new fronts simultaneously across the entire region. Look at the two American aircraft carriers in the Gulf right now, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford. Each one is the most powerful naval vessel ever built by human hands. Each one carries more firepower than most countries' entire armed forces combined, and they are sitting far from Iran's coast. Not because the admirals are afraid, because the admirals understand that getting those carriers within range of Iranian hypersonic missiles and drone swarms would risk losing one. And losing an aircraft carrier would be one of the most catastrophic military and psychological blows America has ever suffered. So the carriers stay back. They posture, they project, and Iran knows they will stay back. America's greatest symbols of military power are being held at a distance by a nation under 45 years of sanctions. Think carefully about what that tells you. I want to bring you to today, because everything I have described, the ceasefire trap, the ground invasion trap, the military trap, all of it is visible in what is happening right now on this 31st day of the war. Look at the contradictions. Trump says, and I am quoting him from this morning, that he wants to make a deal with Iran. He is pretty sure it will happen. Pakistan is offering to host talks in the coming days. The foreign ministers of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt met in Islamabad this weekend to push for a diplomatic resolution. At the same time, overnight, U.S. and Israeli aircraft struck Tehran's power infrastructure and plunged the city into darkness. Trump is publicly considering seizing Karg Island. The Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations. 3,500 more Marines have just arrived in the region. Negotiations and escalation simultaneously. That is not strategy. That is what a trapped nation looks like. March 30th, 2026. The trap in real-time diplomacy signal. Trump says Iran agreed to most of 15 U.S. demands. Pakistan offering talks in coming days. Escalation signal. Overnight power infrastructure strikes on Tehran causing citywide blackout. Ground signal. 3,500 Marines arrived aboard USS Tripoli on March 27th. Pentagon preparing weeks of ground ops. Iran signal. Parliament speaker. Enemy signals negotiations while planning ground invasion. We are ready. Proxy signal. Houthis launched missiles at Israel on Saturday. New front opening. Economic signal. Brent crude up 50% plus since Feb 28. IEA calls this biggest oil shock in history. Conclusion, both off-ramps, ceasefire and military victory are becoming harder, not easier, with each day. And Iran is running a strategy that does not require it to win on the battlefield. Iran is running a time strategy. Every day that this war continues, the economic cost to America and its allies grows. Every day that the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, more countries calculate that neutrality, accepting Iran's safe passage deals, is cheaper than supporting America's coalition. Every day that a ceasefire is delayed, the peace terms Iran can demand become more expensive, not cheaper. Iran's parliament speaker said on Sunday that Iran will determine when this war ends. Not America, not Trump, Tehran. And in that statement, in that single sentence, is the most honest description of what a trapped nation looks like. So, given all of this, given that America cannot negotiate its way out without triggering a catastrophic economic chain reaction, given that a ground invasion leads to mission creep from 3,500 Marines to a war America's own military says it cannot win, given that the ceasefire trap and the military trap and the sunk cost trap all converge on the same point, what should America actually do? I want to be honest with you. The answer I am about to give is not the answer that Washington wants to hear. It is not the answer that gives anyone a quick victory to celebrate. But I believe it is the only answer that does not lead to a catastrophe far larger than the one we are already in. America needs to recognize something that its leaders have not been willing to say out loud. The world that existed before February 28th is not coming back. The era of uncontested American military dominance in the Middle East is over. Not because America's military is weak, but because the world has changed. Russia is no longer contained. China is no longer deferential. Iran is no longer isolated. And America, carrying $39 trillion in debt, fighting a war that its own military says it cannot win cleanly, watching its allies calculate the cost of loyalty one by one, America is overstretched. The only real exit from this trap is not military. It is not even purely diplomatic. It is a fundamental rethinking of what American leadership looks like in a world that has changed. It means America sitting at the same table as Russia, China, Iran, and the GCC, not as the unchallenged hegemon dictating terms, but as the most powerful participant in a negotiation where every party has interests that need to be acknowledged. It means America accepting that maintaining military bases in 80 countries while carrying $39 trillion in debt is not sustainable. It means building a new arrangement. Not one where America dominates everything, but one where America leads through cooperation rather than coercion. That is not weakness. I want to be very clear about that. Recognizing that an empire is overstretched and choosing to consolidate rather than overextend is one of the most difficult and courageous things a government can do. History is full of empires that could not make that choice. And history is full of empires that collapsed because they could not. Whether America has the humility and the wisdom to make that choice, whether the political will exists in Washington to say what the reality requires, that is the most important question, not just of this war, but of this decade. And honestly, looking at this morning's news, looking at the overnight strikes on Tehran's power grid, looking at Trump talking about taking Iran's oil, looking at 3,500 Marines arriving in the region, I do not know the answer. What I do know is this: the longer America waits to make that choice, the deeper into the trap it goes, the more lives are lost, the more economies are damaged, the more the world fractures, the more expensive and the more painful that choice becomes. For America, for Iran, for everyone, America is trapped. It cannot go forward without catastrophe. It cannot go backward without catastrophe, and every day it stays where it is. The walls of the trap close a little tighter. Subscribe if you want to keep following this analysis. And tell me in the comments, do you believe America will find the wisdom to choose a different path? Or do you think this war follows the same arc as Vietnam, as Iraq, as Afghanistan? Tell me honestly. I will read every comment. I will see you in the next one.